48 hours after a house explosion here in Scarborough.
Police are investigating a triple shooting in Scarborough.
Police are on the scene of a shooting in Scarborough.
Police are investigating a pair of crime scenes linked to a shooting in Scarborough.
A man is fighting for his life in hospital after a double shooting tonight in Scarborough.
We all know of a place within our city, province, or even country that doesn't necessarily have the best reputation. The negative connotation associated with this rough area in your city, a high crime block, or a rundown neighborhood, is academically known as territorial stigma. This would be used interchangeably with spatial stigma. Basically, this all refers to the negative portrayal and stereotyping based on the physical environment of a particular location within your city. Think of it like the broken windows theory within criminology. I prefer to use the term place-based stigma as a hypernym to encompass not only the physical attributes, but also the social and cultural aspects of a place, which would then be stigmatized by others. More accurately, place-based stigma would refer to the negative perceptions and stereotypes associated with specific locations, often influenced by various factors, including but not limited to the physical environment, race of residents, class of residents, and historical context. It's not just about the physical geography, it's about the stories embedded in the streets, buildings, and the actual real living humans that reside in such neighborhoods. With 5 articles throughout this video, I will be discussing the effects from this stigmatization and how it is one that perpetuates and reinforces the structural violence within communities of the most vulnerable, intersecting other forms of violence like race and class. So let's get into my first article. It is through place-based stigma perspectives that we see revitalization rhetoric, that is to say, justification for gentrification.
Somebody ought to build a town that works. Somebody did.
Gentrification is essentially the process whereby the character of a poor urban area is changed by wealthier people moving in, improving housing, and attracting new business. Now, gentrification is generally hard to define in academia. On one hand, the conceptual idea of what it means for an area to be gentrified are somewhat touched upon. However, the specifics to how such concepts are reached in actualization are unclear and under-examined. The lack of access to public transit, for example, may pose a gentrification risk to some research while others don't. As Dr. Benjamin Price puts it,
the gentrification models disagree on the front end. They disagree on what we call gentrification, and then, not surprisingly, they really disagree on the back end to actually map out what those neighborhoods are. You end up with a radical disagreement. For the purpose of this video, I won't necessarily engage within this discourse. Instead, I'd be using a more nuanced definition of gentrification. That is the process by which communities of color and communities of lower economic status are displaced, alienated, or have overall been hindered in favor of more affluent residences and businesses.
So how does this all come together? Well, depending on how a certain location is perceived, it is then judged by how much change it should undergo. Take this video of Toronto Star journalist Christopher Hume, for example. He predisposes Torontonians as being hypocritical, as in whenever gentrification is done to their neighborhood it's fine, but not so much when done in other areas. He uses the Kensington area as an example, often known for its multiculturalism, street art, and vintage shops. He then concludes that gentrification is something that is inevitable within successful cities, and that the
only constant in any city is change. Forget that and you forget what the city is all about.
When it comes to the Kensington area, Hume takes the position that because of how raw and authentic it is, us outsiders don't want it to change, as if driving out the current residents takes away our entertainment. What Hume fails to consider is the residences themselves. See, what's unfortunate about this video is the implication to the existence of a good gentrification.
Let's also keep in mind that the only thing worse than gentrification is no gentrification.
And while gentrification does have its benefits, it disproportionately favors the wealthy, white, new residents over people of color and those who are not financially stable. A short survey I did for the project was asking people from Scarborough whether or not they had bad reactions from people who they introduced themselves as being from Scarborough, which unsurprisingly, people have had bad reactions. But people from Scarborough know it's a place that, while it has bad reputation, it's unfounded. While place-based stigma may result in gentrification rhetoric, those displaced as a result maintain and carry the burden of place-based stigma despite no longer residing in the gentrified area. Simply put, place-based stigma can be transported to new destinations and is only negotiated by those who carry it. Project Susan, a short documentary filmed in Scarborough, Toronto's East End, tells a story of how such individuals are perceived through the area that they reside and underscores the importance of representation that isn't privy to most gentrification projects. See, I focus on Scarborough mainly because I grew up here, and knowing what I know versus hearing what I've heard, it's important for me personally to represent the area that I am proud of. Scarborough has made me the individual that I am today, but I bear witness to evidence of gentrification's direct impact to the most vulnerable. Be that as it may, this isn't a Scarborough-only issue. When you think of areas around Toronto that doesn't necessarily have the best reputation, there's a few that come to mind. Do you guys all agree that Jane and Finch is the worst neighborhood? Really? Okay.
I don't know, Grant. Scarborough? Jane and Finch. Jane and Finch.
Jane and Finch? Okay. Why?
I don't know. It's got a reputation. I don't really like to go up down north in the subway.
The short documentary from Parkdale also exemplifies how the state neglects residents of gentrifying areas.
Starlight Investments Limited is pleased to advise you of the opportunity to take advantage of the tenancy relocation program. You're eligible for one-time sizable cash payment.
How much?
Does it say?
We're gonna phone and find out.
The result within reality is this circular process, whereby place-based stigma is enough to cause gentrification, and gentrification is enough to initiate place-based stigma.
This isn't to say that change isn't needed. It's just that gentrification has merely taken a nuanced definition that is inherently negative, and place-based stigma will always associate itself alongside it. The aforementioned circular process reinforces both the neglect of an area and the support for misinterpreted change. This video essay by Elliot Sang, for example, emphasizes how changes are occurring, but not that of value to the residents that currently exist within the communities. The problem is that the state merely induces change with little consultation from the community. Toronto's Union Station is a great analogy for this. Most commuters will instantly recognize these dividers that separate the Vaughan-bound and Finch-bound platforms. If you've ever given a single thought about this art, you may realize how completely depressing and unflattering it is. And it's not without reason. See, the city had wanted to commission a piece that would be worthy of the largest transit hub in Canada's largest city, where it would stand out to the masses, from the residents to commuters and even tourists who are greeted at the heart of our city. If you didn't know, the art was done by an OCAD professor who conducted research by riding the subway, something of which I assume is foreign to him, considering he found it depressing. It seemed as though his research was done to see what it's like, but unlike the OCAD professor, for many, their experiences commuting long hours will not end at the conclusion of research. And thus, the OCAD professor decided the perfect thing to do was to convey this depressing feeling he felt onto the art in which he was commissioned to do. It never occurred to him to consider what would make the experience of being in this place at times better. The cost, by the way, for this art to be done was 18 times greater than if we had added safety barriers to Union Station, a feature that was advocated for back then and even now. The solution then is simple. If the problem is that the state doesn't consult the residents, both Sang and many others echo that the solution would be to get residents involved. In doing so, we create spaces that are meaningful and would be of benefit to the residents. Building a sense of place is one that relies on the residents of that community. For my fourth artifact, I won't be presenting a video or an article, but instead, I'd like to welcome you to my neighborhood. Welcome to Malvern. This is to understand the realities of such solutions. Malvern has a plethora of organizations that focus on extracurriculars, resources, and supports for shaping community. The Malvern Family Resource Center, or MFRC, has extracurriculars for youth, has supports for family, and aids in financial literacy. They also help around the community through volunteer work. The Taibu Health Center not only has health supports, but hosts community events that lead to connections that reflect shared experiences between clinician and patient. Malvern has indigenous supports for housing and health. Toronto's community housing, or TCHC, properties also exist within Malvern. Malvern is also home to a state-of-the-art recreational center that hosts learning opportunities for youth council, and more. Malvern is also home to one of many Toronto District School Board newcomer supports, A-Service Canada, and much more. Street Art Toronto, or START-TO, is the exact opposite of the type of art at Union Station, where residents, typically youth, work alongside the city to create meaningful pieces of artwork.
Welcome to Scarborough, where creativity thrives and Street Art Toronto turns concrete into gold.
Malvern has historically been riddled with gang activity and has reaped the consequences of its notoriety. The area is in an awkward phase where it's undergoing massive gentrification efforts, yet is no longer considered a priority neighborhood by the city. Its supports then are financed by the residents that need them. Without the right funding, without the right urban planning, and consequently without the right supports, the area will always ever be a sleeper community with a bad name. Now, don't get me wrong, the supports and resources here at Malvern are great, but while I do agree in the process of strengthening communities, I want to bring attention to the overwhelming majority of residents who are facing too much strain to even consider getting involved in the first place. The intersectionality between place-based stigma, one's financial situation, and one's ethnicity all establish the strains that would hinder one's ability to even participate in extracurriculars, let alone town halls or community outreach by the city. These individuals are the most vulnerable against the impacts of change by the state. No amount of support from organizations can be enough to curb their displacement, discrimination, or alienation. That is, unless we're talking about financial support. The onus shouldn't be on the residents to take rise for the problems of the system. They don't have time to get involved in the city's petty politics. Though the case be such, it's unfortunate that it always has to come down to it. Again, while it is important for residents to take action, they could only do so much with the little time that they have. The problems aren't deemed big enough to cause a riot, but aren't small enough to be experienced by masses. This journal article, a study in Pittsburgh, outlines the main issue isn't change itself, but money. Yeah, money. The financial implications of gentrification place the most burden on those who already reside within the community. Place-based stigma allows for the maltreatment of such individuals, and health implications follow. The burden of place-based stigma is amplified further through racism and classist ideology. Money will do two things. One, it allows for people who cannot afford to stay to, well, stay. And two, gives people time. If change must happen, then it must, but do not deny people the opportunity to make it right for themselves. In addition, give them the financial support needed to sustain themselves through the inevitable. Because if residents are no longer worried about their family's dinner, not only will they have something to give a damn about, but they'd also have the time to do something about it. Now, I have to follow this up by saying, while it is obvious that money cannot refund racial slurs or buy out discrimination or solve all the problems between classes, it is currently the only obstacle between residents and the resources that they need. And only then would one be able to establish a sense of place.